And today we have Lesson 5 of the historical geography of the Holy Land, and this is the Patriarchs. We'll talk about the age of the Patriarchs first, the land, the first stages of penetration. The Patriarchs made their livelihood as herdsmen, and only here and there did they engage in seasonal agriculture. We know that Isaac was one who did some planning, and he made a good profit from his endeavor. In the central hill country, we have Shechem, and it mentions that Abram came there to Shechem, and also Jacob came to Shechem, and Joseph also went to Shechem to look for his brothers. And there is Bethel. We know that Abraham went near Bethel, and also that Jacob went there on his way toward Paddan Aram. There's Hebron. Abram settled near Hebron, and this is where some of his helpers were in the battle against the eastern kings. And then there is Jerusalem, when Abram came back from defeating that coalition of troops that had captured his nephew Lot. Melchizedek, the king of Salem, which is soon to be Jerusalem, he came out and met Abram. Then we have EPHRATH, Bethlehem. This is where Rachel died when she gave birth to Benjamin. And then MIGDALEDER is also mentioned in Genesis 35:21. Then also we have the Negev. Abram went to the Negev. BEERSHEVA. Now, BEERSHEVA is a place where Abraham actually lived, and we know that Isaac also lived there. He redug the well that Abram had dug. And Gerar, and this is in the same area of the Negev, and KADESH, BARNEA. And they were also in Gilead, in Mizpah. This is where Jacob and Laban met. And they also mention is Gilead and Jegar Shahadutha. Mahanaim is one of the towns in Transjordan where Jacob stayed for a little while. And then he went to Peniel or Penuel, and then to Sukkot, where he stayed for quite a while with his flocks. Now, the major question that we have here is, what was their way of life or standard of culture? There is an official letter from the Hittite king Hattusilus to his vassal Nikmapah, the king of Ugarit. And I quote, "Thus speak Hattusilus, the great king, king of Hatti, to Nikmapah as follows. With reference to your message that the merchants, the citizens of Ura, are a heavy burden on thy subject's land, the sun, the great king, has made the following arrangement concerning the citizens of Ura in their relations with the citizens of Ugarit. The citizens of Ura may carry on their business within Ugarit during the harvest season, but in the winter they must leave Ugarit and return to their homeland. Furthermore, the citizens of Ura may not settle in Ugarit during winter time, and they may not acquire houses or fields with their money." Now, you may recall that when Jacob came back to Shechem and was making an arrangement with the Shechemites, they promised that they can live in the land and trade in the land. So here is an example of the king saying at certain times of the year, the citizens of Ura may not live in the city of Ugarit. There's the autobiography of Hattusilus. My lady Ishtar appeared to me in a dream and said, "Fear not, I will not abandon you to a hostile deity." My lady Ishtar always rescued me, always held me by the hand, because I, for my part, was an obedient man, because I walked before the gods in obedience. I never pursued the evil course of mankind. And at the command of the goddess, I took in marriage Puduhepas, the daughter of Pentiparis, the priest. And we founded a family, and the goddess gave us the love of husband and wife, and we had sons and daughters. Furthermore, the goddess, my lady, said to me, "Be subject to me with all your house." And with my house I was true to the goddess, and she dwelt within the house that we were making. Now both of those are indicative of what happened in the case of Abram or Abraham. God appeared to Abram and told him to do certain things, and Abram faithfully did what he was told. In Kodak Hammurabi 146, it says, "If a man take a wife, and she give a maidservant to her husband, and that maidservant bear children, and afterwards would take rank with her mistress, because she has borne children, her mistress may not sell her for money, but may put a slave mark on her and count her among the slave girls." And in the case of Hagar, where she's given to Abraham, she has a child. And it was difficult for Abraham to send her away because the law, according to the Kodak Hammurabi, says that you cannot do that. You can make a slave out of her. She was already a slave, but you couldn't sell her for money. Then we have the legend of Daniel and his son Akhet. Straightway Daniel, the hero, arises and makes his place among the nobles at the threshing floor. He judges the case of the widow. He decides the case of the fatherless. He lifts his eyes and sees the approach of Kothar and Hassis, skillful and clever. This is the dual name of the god who is in charge of making things, the craftsman god. He sees the approach of Kothar and Hassis coming by leaps and bounds. Daniel, the hero, calls to his wife, "Hearken to me, Lady Danaiati. Prepare a lamb from the flock for the appetite of the craftsman god." And you will recall that Abram had lifted up his eyes and he saw the three men, and he calls to Sarah and tells her to prepare food for these three men. And then in the Hittite law code 46 and 47, "If anyone buys all the fields of a craftsman, they shall ask the king, and he shall render those services which the king orders. If there remain fields in the hands of the man from whom he buys, he shall not render the services." You recall that when Abraham wants to buy the cave of Machpelah, and he's told that he can have the cave and the fields as well. And it may be represented here in this case, if he holds on to any of that material, he has to pay the duty on all of it. And then from Nuzu, and we have some very interesting material that comes from Nuzu. This is from number 56. Tamiah, son of Huya, with Shukriya and with Kalahupi, with these two of his brothers, sons of Huya, appeared in a lawsuit before the judges of the city of Nuzu on account of the slave girl Shalili Ishtar. Thus Tarmiya spoke before the judges. My father Huya was ill, and he lay on his couch, and my father seized my hand and thus spoke to me. The other sons of mine are older, and they have taken wives. But you have not taken a wife, so I am giving to you herewith Zeluli Ishtar as your wife. And the judges requested witnesses of Tarmiya. Tarmiya produced 4 witnesses who were examined by the judges. Then the judges spoke to Shukriya and to Kulahupi. Go and take the oath of the gods against the witnesses of Tarmiya. Here you're going to compare the testimony of the witnesses with what the brothers have said. Then it says Shukriya and Kulahupi shrank from the gods. They refused to go before the gods. So Tarmiya prevailed in the lawsuit, and the judges gave the slave girl Zeluli Ishtar to Tarmiya. And then in Nuzu, HSS 567, the tablet of adoption belonging to Zikki, the son of Akuya. He gave his son Shenimah in adoption to Shuri-ha-Ilu. And Shuri-ha-Ilu, with reference to Shenimah, from all the land and his earnings of every sort, gave one portion of his property to Shenimah. If Shuri-ha-Ilu should have a son of his own, as the principal son, he shall take a double share. Shenimah shall then be next in order and take his proper share. As long as Shuri-ha-Ilu is alive, Shenimah shall revere him. When Shuri-ha-Ilu dies, Shenimah shall become the heir. Furthermore, Kilim-Ninu has been given in marriage to Shenimah. If Kilim-Ninu bears children, Shenimah shall not take another wife. But if Kilim-Ninu does not bear, Kilim-Ninu shall acquire a woman of the land of Lulu as wife for Shenimah. And Kilim-Ninu may not send the offspring away. Any sons that may be born to Shenimah from the womb of Kilim-Ninu, to these sons shall be given all the lands and buildings of every sort. However, if she does not bear a son, then the daughter of Kilim-Ninu from the lands and buildings shall take one portion of the property. Furthermore, Shuri-ha-Ilu shall not adopt another son in addition to Shenimah. Whoever among them defaults shall compensate with 1 mina of silver and 1 mina of gold. Furthermore, Yolampa is given as a handmaid to Kilim-Ninu, and Kilim-Ninu has been made co-parent. As long as she is alive, she, that is Yolampa, shall revere her, and Shatim-Ninu shall not amend the agreement. If Kilim-Ninu bears children, and Shenimah takes another wife, she may take her dowry and leave. The remaining sons of Zikki may not lay claim to the lands and buildings belonging to the above one portion of the property. Now that has to do with process of adoption and the bearing of children. And then Gad 51 from Nuzu, tablet of adoption of Nashwa, son of Araheni, who adopted Wulu, son of Pukisheni. As long as Nashwa lives, Wulu shall provide food and clothing. When Nashwa dies, Wulu shall bury him. If there be a son of Nashwa, he shall divide the estate equally with Wulu, and the son of Nashwa shall take the gods of Nashwa. But if there be no son of Nashwa, then Wulu shall take also the gods of Nashwa. Also, he has given his daughter Nehuiah to Wulu for a wife. If Wulu shall take another wife, he shall vacate the lands and houses of Nashua. Whoever breaks the agreement shall pay 1 mina silver and 1 mina of gold. What was the cause of the movements throughout Canaan? Were they attempts to establish ties with local rulers? Or were they part of a massive migration of the second millennium? It is difficult for us to know because we do not have the written records which tell us. When were they in Canaan? Well, in the campaign of the kings against those near the Dead Sea, we know there were 4 kings against 5. And they came from Mesopotamia. Well, according to the historians in England, this would have to have taken place before the time of Hammurabi, because Hammurabi was able to unify the whole land under his own rule, and so you would not have 4 or 5 kings ruling separately, because they are from Mesopotamia. They followed the king's highway, and the coalitions are those from Mesopotamia, the 5 of them, and the 4 kings of the cities around the Dead Sea. And note the geographical updating that takes place in this story. What the city was called earlier and what it is now called. Now we come to the Amarna age, and the Amarna age is named after the tablets that were written to Pharaoh AKHNATON and to his father. There were some to his father. And they were all in his new city that he had built. He is the one that is called the heretic Pharaoh because he advocated the worship of the sun disk and the sun disk only. Now the Egyptians were in control of Palestine, Syria in the late Bronze 1B period. This is the 15th into the 14th century. We have Amenhotep II from 1436 to 1410. His first campaign was to Shemesh Adam and Karn Hatin in Palestine. Karn Hatin is what is now called the Horns of Hatin, and this is a small basalt mountain. It's as a result of the volcanic activity in that area. One topographical list may give his return trip via Hatzor. The stela found at Kinneret tells of the victory of the king of Mitanni. So Amenhotep II was not victorious, even though he had a campaign against that king. The capture of an emissary from Naharine in the Sharon plain proves that the king of Mitanni was continuing his attempts to incite trouble in the Egyptian province, and his efforts bore fruit. He was successful in stirring up the inhabitants that lived in Amenhotep's area. There was a second campaign, and it was directed only against the Sharon and Jezreel plains. Aphek received him in submission. Yahim made no resistance. Then to the Sharon, to RPSN, not sure how to pronounce that, and HTTN, they have only the letters in Egyptian. At Sukkot, he was met peacefully. At Adorayim and Migdal, he had to take prisoners and hostages. There was trouble at Anaharat. He quelled the rebellion and returned to the vicinity of Megiddo. The king of Geba Shemen was brought prisoner to Pharaoh, and replaced. A list of prisoners is a cross-section of social classes in the population. The first group included 550 Marianu. This was the name of the chariot owners and drivers. That was very expensive to keep a chariot, and they were like a noble among the people. The 270 royal concubines, 240 of the Marianu wives, 640 Canaanites, 232 royal sons, 323 royal daughters. And all of these were taken as a safeguard. They were kept in Egypt, and then if the ruler in Canaan did something he was not supposed to, then they would punish the hostages. A final summary lists 127 rulers of retinue, 179 brothers of the rulers, 3,600 kapiru, 15,200 living shashu. Now those are the ones that are generally described as those who live on the sand, sort of a Bedouin type person, and 36,300 huru, and 15,070 living neges, and 30,652 families of these other prisoners. So you see there were huge numbers of prisoners that were taken captive, and of course all of them would become slaves of the Egyptians. It would appear that northern Syria fell away to Mitanni during his reign, and this would be the reign of Amenhotep II. Perhaps the stela at Kinneret reflects this. And there's also material on the Tanakh tablets concerning this event. The Hittites were putting such pressure on Mitanni that the latter began to make peace overtures to Egypt. Now this is up in Mesopotamia, where the kingdom of Mitanni was ruling, but the Hittites were putting so much pressure on them that they decided they had better make up with Egypt to get along well. Then we have Thutmose IV. He took advantage of Mitanni's troubles with Hatti to regain regions of Palestine, Syria, which had fallen away. The only source for this campaign is a list of sacrifices at Karnak. That's a temple in Egypt. Another inscription dating to his reign mentions captured residents called Huru, that is, Hurrians, but probably referring to Palestinians from Gezer or Gaza. One Elamarna text mentions that he was at Sidon, and Sidon is on the coast of the Mediterranean in the Phoenician territory to the north. During his reign, a peace treaty was signed with Mitanni. Ties maintained until Supiluli Umas conquered Mitanni. Evidently, no more expeditions needed in Canaan, because Mitanni no longer caused any problem, and so the Egyptians had control of that area. Another interesting event is that the excavation of the Sphinx took place. This is that monument that is in the form of a lion, and this was done again in 1926, 1927. So several times this Sphinx had to be cleared of sand because the sand continually blew in and covered the Sphinx. And we have Amenhotep III, and he reigned for 38 years, the end of 1400 and the first third of 1300. He obtained Gilu-Hepa, the Mitanni princess, in marriage. That was in his 10th year. He married her. Suppiluliuma's first Syrian foray was in his year 33, but Suppiluliuma's was defeated by Tushratta, the king of Mitanni, who sent some of the spoil to Egypt. Sometime in his reign, he visited Sidon as well. In his 36th year, he married a second Mitannian princess, Tadu-Hepa. Now you notice that Mitanni sent 2 princesses to Egypt, but you don't have any princesses going from Egypt to other lands. That was not considered proper. The first princess that we learn about going to somebody else is the one to Solomon, and then the one who ruled in, I can't think of the name of the country now. He had rebelled against Solomon and went to live in Egypt, and a sister of the queen was given to him as a wife. The small kingdom of Amurru exerts pressure on Byblos, which was loyal to Egypt. The kingdom cannot be geographically defined, but the main center seems to be in the Lebanese mountains. In the reign of the next pharaoh, its power extended to the seacoast, and it took Sumer from Byblos, but lost it later. We're also told that this king, Amenhotep III, killed 102 lions in his first 10 years. Most of these were in the area of Palestine and Syria. He also married a commoner by the name of Tai and excavated a lake for her. So he actually made a lake for her benefit. And he also sent for a statue of Ishtar from the Middle East to cure him from his illness. That didn't seem to help him because his son began reigning as a co-regent with him. And that was Amenhotep IV, or commonly called AKHNATON. He was a religious reformer. He closed down all of the temples and all of the gods in Egypt excepting the sun disk, and everyone was to worship the sun disk. In his 5th year, it may be in his 5th year of co-regency with his father, he moved to AKHNATON, or El Marna. He contemplated a campaign in Palestine, but doesn't look like he ever carried it out. Now, what was Palestine like in the time of AKHNATON? This is the Amarna age. The cities in the plains seem to have ruled smaller areas, and those in the mountains often had wider range of influence. In the north, Hatzor is the only place where king calls himself Sharu. That's the Hebrew word for king. He seemed to control both sides of the North Jordan Valley. He clashed with Tyre, which is one of the cities on the coast of Phoenicia. Ashtaroth, the capital of the Bashan region, had a dispute with Hatzor over 3 cities. If the Ayab of 256 and 256a is king of Ashtaroth, apparently Pihal and Gari, or Gashur, were in his sphere of influence. Then we have the Amek Yisrael, the valley of Israel. There's Megiddo. The influence extended as far as Shunem and Yaphir. Akko, this is on the coast, with king of Shimron. He hijacked a Babylonian caravan at AKHNATON. With the king of Akshaph, he sent 50 chariots to the aid of Jerusalem and Shuradutha. In the Shephelah, Gezer ruled over Ayalon and Zorah. With Shuradutha took tribute from the king of Jerusalem. Shuradutha ruled at Gath, it seems, and the king of Jerusalem had taken Keilah from him, but he took it back. Later, he sided with the king of Jerusalem against the Apiru. Then there is Lachish. Lachish was a scene of intrigue and rivalry. The king was slain by his servants, who became Apiru. Then in the mountains, we have Shechem, apparently ruled by Labiah, who was accused by various kings of interference in their affairs. The king of Jerusalem said he had turned his town over to the Apiru. He was once captured by kings in the north, apparently bribed the king of AKHNATON to release him, and then he was killed. He interfered with the activities in the Emek and had interfered with caravans from Egypt to Mitanni. So you can see that at this time there was a lot of trouble going on in this area of Israel. And in Jerusalem, we have AMENHOTEP. He claims to be a friend and specially appointed officer of the Pharaoh. He complains of trouble with Shuwardata. And there's Milkilu of Gezer and Labiah of Shechem. The Amarna tablets are written at this time. And it shows how easy it was to control this area, because some of the kings asked the Pharaoh, please send me 10 warriors. That will be enough to control my whole area. So it wasn't very strong militarily. The cities mentioned in the Amarna letters, the Syro-Phoenician coast, we have Ugarit, Arvad, Arkat, Ardat, Alaza, Shumer, Batruna, Byblos, Beirut, Sidon, Tyre, Usu, Akko, and Akshaph. In the Lebanese Bekaa, that's the Lebanese Valley, Katna, Kadesh, Lebo, Tubihai, and various towns in the land of Amki. In Damascus region, we have the land of Upi, Damascus, and the land of Takhshi. In Bashan, and Bashan is in the Transjordan area, we have Ashtaroth, Busruna, Kanath, and Zari Bashan. In the Jezreel Valley, Megiddo, Ta'anak, Shimron, Shunem, Ginoth, Gaphia, Hamathon, and Sahi el Batuf. In the Jordan Valley, we have Hatzor, Yanam, Bethshan, Pehel, Saphon. The coastal plain, Gath Padua, Gath Rimmon, Joppa, Ashkelon, Gaza, and Urza. And the Shephelah, Gezer, Rabut, Zorah, Ayalon, Gath, Lachish, and Keilah. In the hill country, Shechem, Jerusalem, Manahath, and apparently Bethlehem. And on the Dead Sea, Zoar. Now that ends our discussion of this, but you'll notice that so many of these names appear again and again and again. And it would do you well to try to determine approximately where they belong on the map.